Welcome to Unapologetically Sensitive, where you can learn, relate, laugh, and maybe even live a bolder, brighter life. I'm your host, Patricia Young. This is a weekly podcast where we explore the strengths we have because of our sensitivity and some of the challenges it poses as well. The information in this podcast is not a substitute for help from a licensed mental health professional. Hey there. To the creatives, healers, sensitives, and deep thinkers, how the heck are you doing? How are you enjoying this 6-part episode with the best of Dr. Gibson? These last 2 episodes, this is number 5 in a series of 6, is about setting the groundwork for setting boundaries and taking care of yourself for the holidays. Now, even though you're listening to this in April, these things that Dr. Gibson talks about are relevant for any type of event. If you have a holiday, if you have a get-together, a gathering, a birthday. How many vague words can I use for a get-together? I think this is really relevant regardless. So I hope you enjoy it. I'm feeling inclined to tell you that I got a new kayak. It's my 5th kayak that I've owned. I had 3 and I sold one of them. Beautiful lime green Ikuma. I think in the last 2 weeks, I paddled about 42 miles. I've really been enjoying paddling again and getting out there. Just wanting to share that with you. I hope you're doing well. And now, on to the show. Dr. Lindsay Gibson is back. This is the 5th time that she's been on the podcast. We recorded 2 episodes. So in another 2 weeks, episode 170 will be another episode with Dr. Gibson. She's the author of Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents, and we talk about how you can get ready for the holidays, but this is beyond the holidays. What we talk about can be used in most situations if you have emotionally immature people in your life. She talks about the 5 hallmarks of the emotionally immature person. In this episode, these are the questions that we addressed. Is there something about holiday get-togethers that makes it harder to deal with emotionally immature family members? What are the factors that affect people's behavior during the holidays? Is there something special about the nature of holiday stress? But this would be the same as if you have a graduation, if you have a birthday, if you have a death in the family, if you have a birth in the family. These are all going to be relevant for those situations. What are the steps in planning to make the holiday visit as healthy as possible? What are the likely pitfalls to be ready for? How do we deal with them? Why do we often become immobilized or silent like scared children rather than standing up for ourselves in the face of emotionally immature behavior? And the last question that we talk about is, how do you set your boundaries when someone is getting upset with you for saying no? I just love these episodes. Dr. Gibson's episodes are the most downloaded episodes. I really can't say enough about her. So let me tell you a little bit about Dr. Gibson. Lindsay Gibson, PsyD, has been a licensed clinical psychologist for over 30 years and specializes in individual adult psychotherapy with adult children of emotionally immature parents. She is the author of 4 books. Her book, Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents, remains a #1 Amazon bestseller. The follow-up to this book is Recovering from Emotionally Immature Parents, and the second edition of her first book, Who You Were Meant to Be, has been recently released on Amazon. Her latest book, Self-Care for Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents, was just released in September 2021. In the past, Dr. Gibson has served as an adjunct assistant professor teaching doctoral psychology students. I believe she just finished her 5th book too, but we did not talk about it. Her contact information is in the show notes, but if you're interested in getting in touch with her, her website is Dr. Lindsay, Lindsay, Gibson.com. I think you're going to love this episode. And now, on to the show. Hey, Dr. Gibson, how are you?
Hi, Patricia. I'm doing great. It's a pleasure to be here today.
I love having you here. The listeners love your episodes. They're always the most downloaded episodes. So I am so excited to be here today. Today, we're going to be talking about getting ready for the holidays, setting the groundwork for the holidays if you have an emotionally immature person, emotionally immature parent in your life. So can we start with what is an emotionally immature parent or an emotionally immature person?
Yeah, it's always good to do a review of that so we are all on the same page. The idea is that our personalities have different strands of development. For instance, we have our intellectual development, we have our emotional development, we have our social development, and they all are kind of separate strands. So you can have a person who is socially very skilled, you can have a person who is intellectually very educated, very smart, and then you can have in that same person the strand of emotional development is really quite immature. So I mentioned that up front because sometimes people have a lot of trouble with the concept of emotional immaturity, especially if it's in the older generation that
Hmm.
they've grown up revering, because they say, how can my father be emotionally immature? He's, running his own business, or he's a college professor or whatever. And it's like being emotionally immature is not being a bad person. It's not
Right.
casting aspersions on them. It's just saying that in this line of their development, they are really more characteristic of a much younger person, like often as young as a 4 or 5 year old emotionally. Okay.
Hmm.
But if we look at what are the five hallmark characteristics for emotional immaturity, the first one would be that they are very egocentric. As a good shorthand, just think of a 4 year old, okay? A 4 year old is a little person who is run by their emotions and has enough language to make you think that maybe they can be reasoned with. But if you've ever tried to reason with a 4 year old, you know that veneer of logic is very thin.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
they act like and talk like little people that have reasonable minds, but they are very much run by their emotional needs. So that's the way emotionally immature people are. They're very self preoccupied, very self centered, and they have very poor empathy. It's hard for them to put themselves in the shoes of other people. And they often don't know what you're talking about when you try to explain to them how you feel or how something looked to you or felt to you. And that's because they haven't really reached the stage of mental development at an emotional level.
Hmm.
Okay. Maybe they can do calculus and nonlinear equations. Okay. But when it comes to having a relativistic ability to see how other people would see a situation,
Hmm.
put themselves in your shoes, that's foreign to them. They
Hmm.
just don't know what you're talking about. And they're not self reflective. If there's a problem in the relationship, if something goes wrong between you or you get upset with them, they don't reflect on it to ask themselves, gee, did I do something? Let me think back to what I said. No, they don't do that. If they're upset or somebody's taking them to task, their reaction is to project blame or to explain to you why they're right or
Hmm.
explain to you that they had good intentions, but they really don't reflect on their own behavior. And so that makes change very hard for them. Say another thing is that they engage in what one researcher has called affective realism. And that's a term meaning that when they look at the world, they look at the world through the prism of their own feelings. So for them, reality is what it feels like to them. If I feel like you're disrespecting me, you are disrespecting me. If
Hmm.
I feel like you're dirty, rotten scoundrel because you disagreed with me about something, that's what you are,
Hmm.
because that's what it feels like to me. And then finally, they have a hard time with deep emotion. They tend to avoid anything that has to do with depth between people. So, emotional intimacy, where people talk honestly and truthfully about what's going on in their deepest souls, that's not their cup of tea. In fact, they're practically phobic about it. So when you, as a child, go to a parent with an emotional issue or an emotional need, and they're emotionally immature, that parent is going to either back up, withdraw from that child emotionally, or they may get angry at the child, brush the child off, dismiss the child, tell them that they don't have to worry about that, or they need to stop crying because need to go deal with it. They will push the child away, or in one way or another communicate to the child that you coming to me with your feelings is not cool.
Mm-hmm.
So you can imagine how all these things combine for the kind of experience that a child would have with a parent like this.
Yeah.
So those are the 5 main characteristics. There are other ones that come up for different types of emotionally immature people, but you're going to find those 5 characteristics in all of them.
Are these people often very likable and personable to people outside of the family in the public view?
They can be.
Mm-hmm.
Remember what I said about the different strands of development?
Sure.
So let's say you have a person in your family who is very well developed socially.
Mm-hmm.
They have an excellent social persona. They look good at church. They look good at PTA, whatever. And they keep that mask up. And it's easy to keep up in social situations because, again, you don't have that emotional intensity that they really become overwhelmed by and don't like. So
Sure.
they can maintain the persona. People can come up to you and say, "Oh, I just love your mother, I love your father, or your sister's so sweet," or whatever they might
Mm-hmm.
say. And you might have a different experience of them because you're dealing with them at an emotionally intimate level sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And you may find their self-centeredness hard to take when
Mm-hmm.
you're living with it day in and day out. So absolutely, yeah, there can be a big difference there.
Yeah. I want to move on to our questions, but I love this recap. And I love how you talk about its different strands of development so that in some areas people may be very, I hate to use the word functioning, but people appear to be very well integrated. You see an adult body, but then there's like this little child that's inside that can be very confusing when that part comes up because in other aspects, this person appears to be operating as a fully functioning adult and there's something that's not.
Yeah, I'm glad you pointed that thing out about the little child in the adult body
Mhm.
because 4-year-olds can be formidable when they're upset
Mhm.
and they can be little tyrants, but they're 3.5 feet tall at that.
Right.
When you have a grown man who is getting upset like a 4-year-old and he's taller than you are, or he's bigger than you are, or maybe he just has a very commanding presence. Yeah, that's scary. It
Yeah.
works on you body wise. I mean, your body recognizes a big person who's upset
Right.
as a threat, whether you
Sure.
want to believe that or not. Yeah.
Right. And I think as people that are deep thinkers and deep feelers, because we have so much empathy and our ability to see things from more than one perspective, we can shift from our perspective to the other. That often makes it difficult for us to maintain boundaries. It can be really challenging to understand why other people don't have that ability to see more than one perspective and to have that empathy. And it can be baffling that somebody can be telling us that we're wrong and we don't understand why. And I think that also creates what I would call a trauma response.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I was just reading about this today. It's such a fascinating topic, but yes, if you can think in a certain way, if you can have a certain emotional or psychological experience, like putting yourself in someone else's shoes or feeling empathy for someone, you have developed to the point emotionally that you can do that. Okay. It's like when you develop to the point where you know there aren't monsters under your bed.
Hmm.
Okay. But the 3-year-old or the 4-year-old knows that there are monsters under the bed. That's the way their world is, a magic world, and it's a very unconscious kind of world. So they have a whole different way of thinking about their fears than we do.
Mm-hmm.
And that's because of a developmental achievement that we have, that we can think that way. So it's real hard to kind of run the camera backwards and remember what it was like to not feel that empathy or that perspective taking. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, they really lots of times don't have the ability to do that.
Right. Right. Lindsay, is there something about holiday get-togethers that makes it harder to deal with emotionally immature family members?
Oh, yeah. I think we can safely say that.
Do tell.
Well, gosh, just listen to people when they come back. They'll tell you all about it, or the trepidation they're feeling about going too, because people get very anxious and kind of can dread the holidays with their family because they can become so unpleasant. But I think that one of the things that makes the holiday get-togethers hard on people is that it stirs up the healing fantasy. I mean, we may feel like we're very realistic and accepting of our loved ones' level of maturity or their limitations, and being kind or close or whatever the quality is. And we can feel like we're all set on that. But then, you listen to Home for the Holidays and Jingle Bells and see all the advertisements, and everything is about the wonderful family. And some little child part of you thinks maybe this year, maybe this
Mm.
year we'll have a good holiday, or everybody will be on their best behavior. I mean, we're surrounded with that societally.
Mhm.
So that's one thing. I mean, and once you get a healing fantasy going before you go in for a visit, you are expecting something that they really can't give you.
Mhm.
It's kind of setting yourself up for a fall, and it's setting them up to be experienced as annoying or irritating or enraging,
Mhm.
because that inner part is wanting something more than they can give. So that's one thing. The other thing is that holidays are about the holiday. The focus of the holiday is the holiday. So
Mhm.
depending on what the celebration is, the focus is on, for instance, at Thanksgiving, togetherness, family, thankfulness, etc. Other holidays have different themes. But the focus is not about mom. It's not about dad. It's not about the brother. And that's very hard on emotionally immature people who have a heavy preponderance of narcissistic tendencies.
Mm.
Because when they're not the center of attention, they feel like they're coming apart. They need other people to pay a lot of attention to them and sort of agree that they are the center of the get together, because that helps them hold themselves together psychologically, makes them
Mhm.
feel stable, makes them feel good about themselves. So, along comes a holiday like Christmas, and it's all about the presents and it's all about the tree and the meal, right? They often will get into some kind of conflict and mess that up in some way, so that
Mhm.
all the focus falls back on them or the thing that happened or the fight or the because it makes them feel psychologically real again when they
Mhm.
can engage other people into paying attention to them.
Mhm.
So, yeah, unfortunately for people like that, holidays for their family members are often sort of like walking on eggshells, waiting for something to go wrong
Right.
that will set these people off. And then the other thing is that for some reason, and I think this is true about everybody, I think holidays and big events where you're hostessing and you're buying the food and you're tired and your empathy is being exhausted because there's so many people around, so many things to think about. I don't think anybody is really at their best under those kinds of emotionally demanding situations. At least I know I'm not. And I think emotionally immature people feel that especially. And they, in response, may become more controlling, more critical, because they're
Mm-hmm.
trying to get a handle on all this overstimulation that's going on while
Yeah.
they're lacking the support of being the center of attention.
Right. And I think for the people that are deep thinkers and deep feelers, the holidays can be incredibly overstimulating with everything that's going on. And I know I've talked to a lot of people about how much pressure there is in opening gifts, about having to have a certain reaction, which could also be in response to having an emotionally immature parent who needs to feel really good and proud about what they got. And if you don't have the quote right response, so it doesn't even become about the gift, it becomes about putting on this show and everybody's tense. And it really can be challenging.
Yeah, and I can just feel the tiredness that would come on at giving that kind of emotional support and validation as part of your receiving the gift. I mean, that's a huge outlay of energy.
Hmm. Hmm. Receiving a gift should be joyful. How many of you listeners have a recollection or a memory of getting something you didn't like? And was it okay to express that? Or if you were disappointed or it didn't work, was your parent sensitive or empathic, or did they get frustrated? So I think there's so much that can get wrapped up in complicating what it was initially about and what it evolved to today. It can be a lot.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. What are some of the factors that affect people's behavior during the holidays? And is there something special about the nature of the holiday stress? I know we've talked a little bit about the holiday stress.
And the activation of fantasies for what we wish things were.
Sure.
There's also, I think, a real pressure, and I think this comes from advertising, social stuff, maybe even the religious component to the holidays. But there's a kind of a pull for fusion, for emotional fusion. Like in family therapy theory, there's the idea that families that have a lot of emotional immaturity really don't allow their members to become individuals. The family members are kind of emotionally and psychologically fused, like we're the Smiths, or we're the Jones. We are a unit, and you are just like me, and we can all depend on each other to be a certain way, to play our roles. There's a lot of that kind of boundary blurring fusion between people that when that goes on, like during a holiday visit, it's very tense.
Mhm.
People can feel the pressure to mirror the other people and to provide the reaction, like you mentioned, that they want, and to think about how to, make mom happy, make dad happy. And those kinds of pressures on people to fuse and to lose their identity, that's exhausting. I mean, the
Mhm.
symptom of that is fatigue
Yeah.
because you're having to use so much of your brain energy to suppress your own natural, spontaneous reactions to things.
Mhm.
And anytime you use brain inhibition, like I'm stopping myself from doing something, that is like opening the floodgates of your energy. It just
Mm.
flows out of you. It's nothing more exhausting than inhibition. And
Mhm.
so a lot of that does go on under holiday circumstances because of all the role pressure and so forth. And then there's everything around the holidays also becomes a symbol for love. And now, this is interesting because emotionally immature people are very symbolic people. And you would think, well, I don't think they're really symbolic. They seem very concrete.
Mhm.
But what I mean by that is that, let's say you say, I don't care for any turkey
Mhm.
at Thanksgiving. The turkey symbolizes your love for your mother.
Mhm.
Okay, mom spent all day cooking that turkey. Okay, so when you say, I don't care for any turkey, what they hear is, I don't love you and I don't care that you work so hard for me.
Right.
A lot of things take on this symbolic importance for emotionally immature people, and they take these things to heart. Everything's personal, okay?
Mm-hmm.
So if you come home and you want to stay 2 days instead of 3 days, well, that means that you only love me 2 days worth and not 3 days worth.
Mm-hmm.
Everything becomes this big symbolic thing. And of course, advertisers really accentuate this when they're doing the ads, which are essentially selling love and
Mm-hmm.
togetherness. And they're also putting that demand on the interaction just by, showing us something to pattern ourselves after that's extremely unrealistic.
Right.
A lot of pressure on us.
Right. And there's no room for the individual, or if you come home and you're tired or you're stressed or you need to take a walk or you need to stay somewhere else, there's no room for that individual and relationship because the rules are this is what love looks like in our family. So it creates a tremendous amount of stress and pressure that really I think can run very counter to how most of us that are deep feelers and deep thinkers, we want to be comfortable. We don't want to wear the uncomfortable clothes that maybe are insisted on because this is what you wear at a holiday, but they're not cozy and the tags are uncomfortable and all of those external ways that we jump through hoops to make people happy that have nothing to do with who we are as human beings.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
I love the way you describe that because it's just right on the money.
Yeah. Yeah. What are some steps in planning that people can make to make the holiday visit as healthy as possible?
Well, I think the first thing you have to do to make the visit as good as possible is you have to assess what your realistic goals are for the visit. If you want to have as pleasant as possible a visit, sit down with a piece of paper and a pencil and figure out what that looks like. Ask yourself, if I could choose and nobody would be upset with me, how long would I stay? And a number will pop in your mind. It might be 2 days, it might be 3 days, it might be come back on Sunday, come back on Friday, but something will pop in your head if you present that scenario to your brain that nobody will be upset with me,
Mhm.
they won't even notice. What would I do if I had complete freedom?
Mhm.
And then you think about what you may be sort of secretly longing for. This is going back to the healing fantasy, which is the kind of close relationship that you've always wanted. Do you have any fantasies going on like that? Are you hoping that this will be the Christmas that you get dad by himself and he finally asks you about your work? Whatever the fantasy is, write it down and ask yourself if this is likely to happen
Mm.
so that you listen to that little child part of you that wants
Mhm.
dad to be interested in you, but you're kind of preparing that child part that, yes, of course you want that. Who wouldn't?
Mhm.
But we probably aren't going to get it.
Mhm.
So let's be prepared for that. And maybe the best thing we're going to get is a squeeze on the shoulder from dad, if
Mhm.
that, and kind of prepare yourself that way and lower your expectations. If you go in with the idea that this holiday you're going to really start building some real relationships, that's too much freight for us for a holiday to carry
Mhm.
because holidays are exhausting. They take up a lot of time and energy. Nobody's at their best. And so this is really not the time to attempt a significant bonding experience,
Mhm.
not the time to attempt getting close because they may not be responsive for many reasons that have nothing to do with you. It's just that maybe they're tired, or maybe this is a time of year that they have some association to that isn't positive.
Mhm.
So get yourself arranged before you go in so that you have, as much as possible, things set up to give you the best possible experience while you're on your visit.
Mm. Do you find too that having goals that are more related to what the individual can do and has control over, as opposed to relational things. Like, I'm going to go and I'm going to listen to my body, and I'm going to rest when I'm tired, and I'm going to observe, and I'm going to make sure that I'm taking care of me. I think that it's so easy to have this it's what you said, but I sometimes think it can go deeper of, I'm going to have these close connections, or I'm not going to get angry, and I think that when it's about our behavior, it still may feel uncomfortable when we leave the situation, but we're like, did I show up? Was I honest? Did I overshare? Did I contain myself? Whatever things we need to do to manage so that we kind of control ourselves. I feel like I'm being very inarticulate.
No, no, you're bringing up a really, really good point, which is that we want people to not set goals for themselves that end up putting the control in the hands of the other person.
Mm-hmm.
I love what you said about, I think I can summarize it by saying, keep your relationship with yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Keep talking to yourself, keep listening to yourself. Like you were saying, if you're tired, if you need to take a break, if you need to go back to the hotel or you need to go for a walk outside, pay attention to what your body and yourself is telling you. And keeping that, I'm so glad you brought that up, because I really wasn't going interior enough in my
Mm-hmm.
answer. Yeah, that relationship with yourself, where you are just as important as everything else that's going on, is crucial. Yeah, because once you lose that connection with yourself, you get into all kinds of reactivity.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thanks. What are the likely pitfalls to be ready for, and how do we deal with them?
Well, a likely pitfall is that the longer you stay, the higher the possibility that there's going to be conflict and disappointment. That's for starters.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that's because familiarity breeds old patterns. Okay. And we can slip into them very easily. So, one pitfall is establishing optimal distance, thinking about the amount of time that would be good for you, that would be tolerable for you. Another one is space. If you feel comfortable sleeping on the couch, great. If you need to get away and have your own hotel room, even if it's expensive, that might be worth it. It might be worth
Mm-hmm.
it to your emotional health, to have a place to retreat to. So you have to think about personal space, you have to think about the length of time, and then other pitfalls are when people get very reactive, or they say things to sort of start a conflict or to goad someone. And we have to remember that reactivity is not going to go well for us. It's not that we're going to be upsetting them. It's that the more reactive we allow ourselves to become, the more upset we're going to feel.
Mm-hmm.
So, that idea, like you mentioned earlier, Patricia, of observing, keeping an eye on how the interaction is going, how you're feeling, what your needs are, that's incredibly important, because that will help you avoid some of these pitfalls that are going to be there if you have
Yeah.
emotionally mature people in your family.
Yeah. I think the wounded part of us often is wanting to feel seen and heard in a way that we don't usually get in our families of origin, but we may get them other places. So that's one of the hidden expectations that we have. And I love the idea of going in kind of as a researcher with your ball cap pen and your pocket protector and your clipboard, and just observing what's going on and what the dynamics are, because that kind of helps to pull us out of that young part that just wants to be loved, to what really goes on here. To gather information in a very objective way can also help to not make it feel so personal, because there are these dynamics and we get so entrenched in them that it's very hard to see them if we not able to pull back and take a different perspective.
Yeah, I love that image. I hope all the listeners take that one to heart, the ball cap and the clipboard.
And your pocket
I mean,
protector.
seriously, those those kind of images are very, very helpful, actually.
Yeah. Yeah. Why do we often become immobilized or silent like scared children rather than standing up for ourselves in the face of emotionally immature behavior?
Well, remember when I said earlier that our bodies have a reaction? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say that here's this adult who is upset or mad at us, or they're doing some kind of emotional reaction on us that is designed to make us feel guilty or ashamed or
Mm-hmm.
afraid or self doubting, those kinds of emotional coercions. When they do that, your body will respond with the fight, flight, freeze
Fawn.
reaction.
Fawn or
Yeah.
fib.
Yeah, fawn. Also tend.
Mm-hmm.
Let me take care of you. You're upset,
Right.
but you'll go. Your body wants you to survive, and it's not going to
Mm-hmm.
take the chance that this person is not really dangerous. The body knows that this person is upset, and or this
Right.
person is belligerent, or is acting like they hate you. Okay, if you said you're acting like you hate me, they would say, "What are you, crazy?"
Mm-hmm.
But their eyes are flashing fire, their fists are clenched. Yes, your body will read whatever they do very accurately at an emotional level.
Mm-hmm.
And we can go into, I think, an appropriate shutdown
Mm-hmm.
when we see that kind of physical manifestation of their negative emotion.
Mm-hmm.
All right. The question becomes, if we tend to get easily shut down like that, what do we do about it?
Mm-hmm.
And that's where we can use things like techniques to ground ourselves, like excuse ourselves, go to the bathroom, step outside, make a point to feel your feet on the floor in your shoes, clenching your hands. Something that gives you stimulation physically can bring you back into presence, back into being in yourself again.
Mm-hmm.
And the longer it goes on, the harder it is to snap yourself out of it.
Mm-hmm.
So my advice is that people really look for these moments where they start to freeze up and then do something. Take some kind of action. Stand up and take your plate to the kitchen. Like
Mm-hmm.
I said, go to the bathroom, walk into another room. Say, I need to get my sweater from the car.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever it is, but some kind of action takes you out of that pressure that emotionally immature people put on you at those moments to cave and to accept their domination or their authoritarian move that they're
Mm-hmm.
doing on you.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I just really encourage people not to feel bad about themselves when they become immobilized or silent.
Yep.
Really, if you're a halfway sensitive person and someone is acting like that, and they'll act worse in the privacy of their home than they will anywhere else, keep
Mm-hmm.
that in mind. You're going to have a complementary reaction, and that's a natural thing.
Right.
Like I just said, there are things we can do to counteract that. But please don't feel bad about going into it in the first place
Right.
because, yeah, if somebody's being unpleasant to you, you're going to have anxiety.
Right. And I think so many of us, and this is a gendered statement, maybe I can make it not a gendered statement, that we were taught to comply, to smile, to not make waves. And I recently, if you listen to episode 165, I had a trauma response. Trauma gets stored in our body. And this was not with somebody who was going to threaten me, but I felt threatened. And I went into the fawning. You're right. I'm sorry. I was aware of deep breathing. I was aware of rubbing my thumb on my forefinger to soothe myself. I thought I was being present. And when I got up to walk away, I started to cry. And by the time I got to my car, I was sobbing. And in retrospect, I was frustrated because I really needed to clap back in this situation. I just didn't. So, having a tremendous amount of compassion for yourself and for me, part of what I did after the fact was once I'd kind of gone through that trauma response and had time to process is if that happened again, what would I want to say if it were to happen again? And that really helped to kind of grow up that young part who never had a voice. It's like, you're right, I'm sorry, even though it's not my fault. What would I say and what would I do? That's part of how we can kind of tend to our own healing in these situations because we've got these little people inside that never got a chance to go, you need to stop this. This is not okay. What do you think you're doing? So we go into that fight, flight, freeze, fawn, fib, whatever it is. And we don't have to do that anymore.
I love that example because I just want people to be so gentle with themselves when they're trying to mature in this area
Mm-hmm.
and they're trying to be stronger for themselves. That, I mean, these people are tough to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
They're tough for everybody to deal with.
Yeah.
The thing that I would say about your wonderful example, Patricia, is that it would have been so much worse if you hadn't cried
Mm-hmm.
because your body was releasing all that feeling
Right.
that you had been drawn into.
Right.
And there may even have been something of that upset in the other person
Mm-hmm.
that you were expressing for the both of you. I mean, who knows?
Right.
But yeah, that reaction is so normal.
Right. And I think we need to process the tears and the anger. And if we only go into anger or we only go into tears, not necessarily with the other person, but in our healing process, we're out of balance. And I think we need the combination of both of those to really do healing. That's just my thought. What do you think?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think especially total agreement about the tears part
Mm-hmm.
because that's just knowing how you feel about something. I think anger is a great signal.
Mm-hmm.
It's telling you something has happened that came across your boundary or isn't treating you as a real live individual.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a signal. If you get into the anger and you get stuck there, which a lot of us do, of
Right.
course, because that's the way anger is, it can really hold you in a trap
Mm-hmm.
vis-a-vis the other person. So I always like to, yes, of course, acknowledge the anger, feel the signal of anger, and then ask yourself, what happened here?
Mm-hmm.
What did they do? Or
Right.
what did I do? Because that understanding is what's going to empower you.
Mm-hmm.
When you're reactive and angry with somebody and that's as far as it goes, you just know that you're ticked off at them, that's not really advancing you either.
Mm-hmm.
So to say, well, actually, what happened was that my right to be my own person was totally dismissed, totally
Mm-hmm.
invalidated. That's what was infuriating.
Right.
So you need, whenever there's something that makes you angry, we need to break it down and figure out what happened so we don't just get locked into the emotional response.
Right. Right. Lindsay, one last question. How do you set your boundaries when someone's getting upset with you for saying no?
I think anticipation of that is very, very important.
Mhm.
And most of us can do that. Most of us know what our loved ones don't want to hear or don't want us to do.
Mhm.
So be ready for it.
Mhm.
If you know that they're not going to like it that you're going to stay at a hotel this time, or they're not going to like it that you're not eating turkey this time, or you're not going to like it that you only brought one gift this time, whatever the thing is, then be ready for it. And I always think about how trucks, when they're going up a steep grade, will downshift into a lower gear.
Mhm.
And the truck can't go as fast in that lower gear, but it has more traction, it has more power, and it saves energy, it saves gas, right?
Mm.
So the truck goes up the incline slowly in this lower gear and makes it to the top. And that's kind of the image that I like to suggest to people is shift into a lower gear and
Mhm.
persevere because that persevering, that repeating the no is really the answer because emotionally immature people are used to being able to bully people or pressure people into giving them what they want or
Mhm.
backing off of their boundary. If you just keep holding on to what your boundary is and restating that as necessary, after a while, there's nothing for them to say.
Mhm.
Okay. And you can also ask yourself, why? Why are they getting so upset? In other
Mhm.
words, you don't go into buying into, well, of course they're upset. I said I was not going to eat turkey.
Mhm.
that's that doesn't make any sense.
Mm-hmm.
And you can ask yourself with that clipboard kind of way, why are they so upset with me for not wanting to eat turkey?
Mm-hmm.
And then you can answer that, which is, I'm individuating from them, or I'm not being fused with them, or I'm not being who they think I should be. That's what's going on.
Right.
But I can continue to say no about the turkey if I don't want it.
Right. I think sometimes you can think about someone that you love and care about. And if they told you that they weren't going to eat turkey, what would your response be? I think it helps to balance
Yeah.
that. Like, I wouldn't have that, like, be like, okay, great. There's other stuff you can have. But we get so locked into that pattern with the emotionally immature person that we think we have to defend or explain or rationalize that we see things from their perspective, as opposed to if somebody else said they didn't want turkey, I'd be like, okay, no problem.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that repetition of it is the
Hmm.
part that works, because they really don't have an answer for that kind of perseverance on a position. They don't know what to do about that, and they will ultimately back off of that.
Right. Right. Lindsay, we are out of time. Is there anything else before we end that you want to say?
No, just I want to remind people and encourage people to keep in touch with yourself over the holidays. Maintain your relationship with yourself. Don't disengage from you while you're there. And remember that you are just as important as every other person at that gathering. Don't lose sight of that, because it's easy to do with emotionally immature people. So if you do those two things, to stay in touch with yourself and remember that you are just as important as they are, you will have the right instincts for taking care of yourself.
I love that. Thank you so much for being here with us again, Lindsay. I appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you.
Hey again. So, was that helpful? Did you get some good tips? I just love what Dr. Gibson has to offer. If you are a new listener, I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I'm registered as a therapist, but I've moved to a coaching model. I'm working with lots of HSPs, and I seem to be working with more people, more women that are late diagnosed autistic. And I'll be talking about that a little bit more. If you struggle with relationships, if there are any areas where you're really having a hard time, boundaries, you've got an emotionally immature parent, struggling with work, with setting boundaries, perfectionism, feeling like you're not doing enough, that you're not good enough, I would love to work with you and help you learn to thrive as a highly sensitive person or as an autistic. You know, we struggle, and it's okay to struggle, but not so much that you're not doing well. And if there's anything I can do to support you, I would love to do that. You can reach out to me at unapologeticallysensitive.com. I would love to do a free 20-minute consult with you to see if we're a good fit, or you can schedule an appointment with me. I hope you're doing well. Jen and I will be back soon. We're recording some episodes for you. I think that's all I have. Remember, sensitivity is nothing to apologize for. It's your superpower. Have a blessed day.